Roger, welcome to Uniquely Issaquah. It's been a long time coming, my friends.
Yes, thanks very much for having me. It was a little bit of a challenge to get the schedule set up, but I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, just for a little background for everybody, I heard about Roger's story several months ago. I was really excited, wanted to get Roger on the podcast, and we just kept missing the mark. But here we are, like 3.5 months later, and we're here to talk about the unique find that you discovered in your backyard while you were building your new home, right?
Yes. Yep.
So let me just open the floodgates to you. We'll just dive right in and just kind of tell the story of this petrified wood that's sitting right here in front of me.
Sure, you bet. So, first of all, I've been a rock hound forever, and I have a small collection of fossils, including petrified wood from the state of Washington. So when they started construction on our new home up in the Issaquah Highlands in 2016, every day they'd dig deeper and deeper on the excavation. I'd go out and look. I'm always curious to see what's in the ground. Mm-hmm. And I went out there one day, and the excavator came up to me. He was really excited. He said they'd hit some unusual rock right in the far corner of the lot at the excavation. Mm-hmm. And when he showed it to me, I realized they'd hit into some petrified wood. A piece had fallen off, and he carried it to the back of my car. That it was a small piece. It probably weighed about 100 pounds. Oh, wow. And we had no idea how much was there, how big the specimen was. But I knew that there was something really unusual in the ground.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Nice. So a rock hound, is that just a hobby, something that came along with your life? I mean, what's kind of your background, your professional background, before we get totally into the story? Just kind of give everybody kind of like your perspective on the world and life a little bit, professionally and personally. So.
Sure, absolutely. So, I rock hounding is strictly a hobby.
Okay.
I have no formal education in geology, paleontology, archaeology, or anything related to what's in the ground, other than a lifelong interest. I actually do hold a PhD in cell biology, and I've spent the majority of my professional career studying cancer and developing therapeutics to treat cancer patients. Mm-hmm. So I take that very passionately, but along with that goes a much broader interest in science in general, including geology and rock collecting, fossil collecting. Right. It's just been a lifelong
So the whole time? It wasn't a bug you picked up? It's just,
I still have fossils that I collected when I was in grade school.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So a lifelong hobby. So if I ever go on a hike with you in some rocky area and you just wander off a trail and start grabbing stones, I'll know what's going on.
Yep, and make sure you bring a rock hammer with you, safety glasses, and something to carry specimens in, because when I do go out with friends and family looking for rocks, we always find something. And once they're interested, they want to take it home. So,
that's great. Well, let's circling back to the unique find you discovered in your backyard while building. So the builder hit the log, knocked out a chunk, and then what happened with you?
Well, so they were on a building schedule, and they needed to get the form set in for the footing for the house. And so they actually covered the specimen with, what was shown. They covered it with plastic and weatherproofed it so that they could get going on the concrete work. Once they had the footing and foundation poured for the house, they were able to expose it, pull the plastic back, and I let them know that, I really want to see how much petrified wood is there and see if I can get some of it out of the ground. Right. By then, the young man who ran the excavator was really excited too, and I came out there on a Saturday to start digging because there was still about 3 feet of topsoil and glacial till on top of it before we could even get down to it. But I came out there on a Saturday, and this fellow was sitting in the excavator. He'd been out there digging on his time.
Oh, wow.
To expose as much of the bedrock as possible.
Okay.
And he's scraping all the dirt off the top. And then we started to realize how big this specimen really was.
Oh, okay.
I thought maybe 3 or 4 feet long, and at that point it was clear that it was 10 or 12 feet and maybe bigger.
Generally, when you find something like this, is it usually smaller? Is it rare to find something as large as what you found intact?
So, Washington's really interesting. Our state gemstone is petrified wood. So generally in the state of Washington, there's a lot of petrified wood. However, most of it's on the other side of the Cascades.
Oh, right.
And so it's geologically very different. In terms of the quality of the wood, the type of stone preservation, it's also very different. And so when I started asking around to the experts, the Geological Survey in particular in Washington, I learned that finding a log on this side of the Cascades is extremely rare. Small pieces can be found, and they have been found, of course. But I've never met anybody who's found it. But
okay.
I was told, yeah. So when I said, no, this specimen is 3 feet in diameter and 12 feet long or something, it was like, oh yeah, that's really special and really different. So
so yeah, because there's the petrified forest on the east side of the
Ginkgo.
Ginkgo, right?
Yep, well known.
I'm sure you've been there many times.
I have been there, yes, you bet.
And so so why is that? Why is it rare on the west side?
It has to do with the geology, and the whole area was, it's an uplift, and there's certainly a lot of volcanic activity, and it's different on this side of the mountains than it is on the other side of the mountains, and I'd say it's either that simple or that complex,
right.
So that's why the difference.
Okay, so what is the process? I'm sure being the rock hound and all the research you've done is how does a piece of wood, a log, a tree, when it falls, how does it become petrified as opposed to just becoming part of Earth again?
Sure. In this particular case, we have to go back at least 35 million years, somewhere
That's
between only. I was in grade school, so between 35 and 50 million years ago. It's called the Eocene epoch, and this area was forested. Okay. And
I think we have a picture, right?
Sure, yeah.
So let's bring up. We've got a little bit of a picture. Let me find that one picture where you had it described. Oh, right here. Right?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is good because this picture shows what the log looked like when it was first exposed.
Oh, okay.
And an idea of the layers that it was buried in. And the area we live in, the Issaquah Highlands, is a little unusual geologically compared to the rest of the highlands and certainly the rest of Issaquah. And I have that from the Icicle Creek Geological Survey, the geotechnical survey that was done on our particular building lot.
Oh, okay.
And this indicates that the surface layer, which is only a few feet thick, frankly, no more than about 3 feet thick. This is a glacial till deposit. So this is left over from many different ice ages.
Okay.
And so this layer is very compact. It's got a lot of rock in it and clay. So it's a real dense consistency. And then underneath that, you immediately hit bedrock. And so this bedrock, this is the Eocene epoch bedrock that I was referring to. It's called the Tukwila Formation in our area. And I have this information from the Fall City Quadrant map that was published by the U.S. Geological Survey. Okay. And that's available online on the web. Anybody who wants to know what's under the feet, they can download the map and study it and find their area and study it. So it's really
nice. And see what they're living on top of, right?
That's there's a ton of information there,
and
they're good at explaining it
in
kind
of layman terms.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, they'll give the age, where it came from, and then it's a lot to read if if you're interested. But so from this illustration, you can see the log in the upper right. And it actually sits below the glacial till, so we know it's in bedrock from the geotechnical survey. And the bedrock is sort of divided into two components. The upper part of it is highly weathered, and then the lower part is really, really hard and solid. So they were, it appears a kind of a gray or dark gray color in this illustration. So they had to use jackhammers to get through this to excavate.
Okay, so this is hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the top part is more flaky.
It's a little bit more crumbly.
Okay. Is that the stuff that's right here on the table?
Yeah. So the petrified wood came out. It's actually different consistencies.
Okay.
The stuff that because the log, it's not laying flat. It kind of points up towards the surface. And the part that's at the surface was a little more weathered, so it was more crumbly, and there's a lot of freeze thaw. There were even some tree roots that had penetrated the very top.
Oh,
of the
okay, so it was
log.
of being affected by out exterior forces.
Yep, just
where
exposure.
This was kind of locked in, right?
Yeah, the stuff that was at the bottom. If there's another photo, if you want to roll to it, of my son actually taking out the bottom part. There, this photo. We had to use a jackhammer to get out part of the bottom, and at one point we finally just had to give up. It was actually too hard for us to remove.
That's so
with
funny.
the jackhammer by hand.
So the distance between the rock hard and kind of this brittle stuff is what? How many feet?
Probably about 8 feet.
Wow, it's amazing the difference.
Yep. And but it's freeze thaw, water penetration, root penetration, and none of that got down this deep into the bedrock. Yep.
So we have a petrified log now. Exactly why? So what caused this specific one to become petrified?
So this log was buried in a volcanic flow, say during the Eocene epoch, and the age of the epoch varies depending on the source, between 30 and 55, or 35 and 55, but in that range. A volcanic flow buried this log, and the log was probably already dead, so it didn't knock down a living tree and bury it. And this is according to the report done by George Musto at Western Washington University. He says the preservation of the wood suggests that it was decaying when it was buried. So this volcanic flow, which is part of the Tukwila Formation, probably came from Mount Persis, which is to the north and east
I think we have
of Issaquah.
I think we have a picture of that.
Yep.
Somewhere
So
right
here's
here.
the map.
Oh man, that's so far away.
Yeah, you can see Issaquah Highlands all the way to the lower left. I think it's about 30 miles or so as a crow flies to Mount Persis. Mount Persis is still there today, and there are hiking trails. These volcanic flows actually spread out and covered a good part of the state in this area.
Right.
The geological history is still a little bit sketchy, and this is still a bit controversial. I have different geological survey reports that give similar age for the flows, but it's a little controversial as to where the Tukwila Formation actually came from. But today, this is the best explanation that we have.
So Mount Persis erupts. You get a volcanic flow, covers the log, or the tree, the down tree, and 35 million years later, we have what's sitting in front of us?
Yep, so it's a piece of rock.
So is it because it gets sealed? I mean, what causes it to get petrified? Is it because it just gets sealed?
A combination of water and minerals. So it's buried in a volcanic flow that cuts it off from air.
Okay.
So it's obviously been heated.
Right.
So it doesn't continue to decay. So the decay in the wood probably happened before it was buried.
Oh, okay.
But water permeates into the flow just as it does, in the ground today. It soaks through the bedrock, and along with that, it brings minerals. Okay, and so those minerals, over thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years, actually replace the wood structure with rock.
Oh, okay.
And there are two dominant kinds of rock in this particular specimen. The most common is you'll find silicon and oxygen, which are indicative of quartz crystals. Okay. So most of the log is actually preserved as quartz crystals or silicates. As you go lower into the log, it becomes more and more dense, and the amounts of iron increase. And there's a lot of iron. Probably came from pyrite deposits in the soil, which are part of the volcanic flow. The iron is replacing wood along with the quartz.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
We know that secondhand because when I took pieces out and set them in my driveway, rust stains formed on the concrete. Yeah, so we know there's a fair amount of iron in there, and it is quite dense, quite dark in color.
So you digging in the backyard, you find the log, you're excited, everybody's digging it up, getting all the chunks out. And then you have all this information. So where did you get all this information about it? I know you're a rock hound, but you're dropping some serious knowledge here, and I'm not sure that your average rock hound has all this information. So where did you get all this information about your amazing find?
So yeah, that was the fun investigation part of this whole thing. So the first place I went, the first question is how old is it, right? It's petrified wood, but how old is it? So the first place I looked was in the geotechnical report for our building lot, and that was done by Issaquah Creek, and they described the bedrock in our area as being Eocene epoch. They actually assigned an age of 25 million years to it. But we know that's quite an underestimate today. But they also describe where the bedrock is, and so we knew exactly how far down and everything lined up. That was the first clue. And then from using that information, I started looking on the web for publications regarding the Eocene, and you get the other, the Holocene, the Pleistocene, other epochs, geological epochs. You find all that information when you start looking. But I had the keyword Eocene. From that, I pulled up a publication, a Geological Survey publication on the Fall City Quadrant, which has, as I mentioned earlier, just an endless amount of information in it. But most importantly, it contains a map that shows the bedrock, the types of bedrock that are found in this part of the state. But also in that map are rivers, lakes, and Interstate 90.
Oh.
So I went to Google, pulled up Google Map, and I overlaid Google on top of the Fall City Quadrant, and I was actually able to locate exactly where our house sat on this Fall City map.
That's great.
Like I said, this was fun. It was a detective work, right? So now I know where it is. I know what the rock is underneath it. I know how old it is. And that same map told us about the glacial deposits and where they came from. So there's, like I said, a lot of information in it. So now I know a lot about the geology of what's underneath our building lot. So the next question is, how old is the petrified log?
Right.
So I wrote an email to the Washington Geological Survey, and they couldn't help directly. It's not what they do. Oh, okay. But from them, I got the name of George Musto, who's at Western Washington University, and he's retired, but still has an appointment there, so he gets to use facilities. George is a great guy. Talk to him. He is the expert on Washington's petrified wood.
Oh, wow.
And I told him about the specimen, and he was very excited and asked if I could send some pieces, and he would have a look at it. So I took pieces of petrified wood that represented different parts of the log, and I sent them to George, and I expected him to look at them and give me an opinion. And wow, he did a lot more than that. So he cut sections of the wood. He looked at it by light microscopy.
Okay.
He looked at it using an electron microscope.
Wow.
And then he did elemental analysis using a method that measures X-rays.
Oh, okay.
And so he was able to tell me not only what the wood was made of, but roughly what type of wood it was. For example, we don't know the species of tree that it came from, unfortunately. But he said, it was because it was decayed, either before or as it was buried, it was decaying. It's kind of hard to identify the species. But because of the structure of the wood, he said it's a dicot, so a tree that loses its leaves every year, as opposed to an evergreen.
Oh, okay.
So we know it's not an evergreen, right? So it's not a cedar tree. It's not one of our many pine trees. We don't know what it is, but it could be something related to a maple or an oak or a beech or something, or an alder. I don't know. But it's so we could tell the we could at least get that far with the identification. He put together a really nice report and sent the report to me.
Oh, nice.
And it's a very, very thorough job. So very exciting to both of us.
That's great. So you've kind of been spreading the word a little bit about this, because it's exciting. I mean, I found out it around the way, and kind of talk about it as you got the report, you got the information, What made you so excited about sharing this information? Because, other people are building around you and they don't know what's in their back. I mean, I think in a way we're lucky that you found it, because if it was just, if it was me, I would have just went, oh, what's that big rock in my – somebody get that rock out of my backyard.
Yeah. Oh, look, a rotten log.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah. But, once the right person saw it and had that energy and excitement about it, talk about that process and wanting to share it with everybody.
Oh, sure. I mean, that was obviously just as much fun as anything else. I think it started, I had, as we were building the house, I was meeting neighbors and one of my neighbors, I just asked him, he's in the sciences, and I just asked him, so, do you, still get interested in science geek kind of stuff? He says, oh, sure. And I said, well, let me show you what I found in my yard, and his eyes got real big. He says, wow, that's really neat. Who'd have thought that there's a petrified log in your backyard? So of course I sent him home with a piece of it, because there's a lot of petrified wood there.
Right.
And word spread a little bit around the neighborhood, other neighbors, and they were asking. And then I sent a note over to Blakely Hall, and just saying, hey, this is actually kind of neat. I wonder if people would be interested in just learning what's underneath their yard. Right. And the answer was yes. I think I was pleasantly surprised at how interested people really are in knowing the long-term history of what's in the ground underneath them. And that spreads.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So Blakely Hall, for people who don't know, is kind of a community center type building up in the Issaquah Highlands. And so you contacted them. So you did a display up there of some sort?
I did a display. They have several different activities that go on there over the course of the year. And they asked me if I could come in and talk about the petrified wood and show off a few pieces of it. Which I did. I was glad to oblige. I took in a box. Please help yourself. Right. I mean, really, please help yourself, because we dug all this wood out of the ground, and I have used some of it, and I'm going to continue to use some of it. But there's just so much there. Right. I thought it would be great for people in the community to be able to own a piece of the rock, literally, and to be able to share some of the history. And I think it's. It's great. When kids get excited about it, they want to learn about it, and they're amazed at how old it is. And, of course, so am I still. Yeah. And I just thought it would be a really good thing to share. And so far, all of our friends and neighbors have agreed.
So we got a couple of pictures that kind of shows people how much. Let's talk about this picture right here.
Sure.
So this is a really pretty display here. So
yeah. So we thought, when in our building plan originally, we had some kind of an ornamental tree or bush.
That's the one thing everybody needs to remember. You were building a house, and did this slow down the building process at all? And how'd that go over with the rest of your family?
So actually, we stayed to their schedule, and it was so helpful. When the excavation company came out and worked on a weekend to clear it. Nice. And then it was kind of a panic when my son and I, and actually one of the construction crew, they came out to jackhammer and we shovels and picks and pry bars to take out as much of the specimen as possible before they started backfilling. Right. The problem is that if you push the schedule out a week, it ends up being a month. Right. And that wouldn't have gone over too well. Yeah. So we got out as much of it as we could. I have it marked, of course. I know exactly where the rest of the log sits. I took out about 12 feet of the log, so 12 by 3 foot in diameter, a few tons of rock. But the rest of it's in the ground, and we actually have no idea how big the tree really is.
So it could be 100-foot tall tree. It fell.
I know it goes in at least 4 more feet because
Okay.
we had exposed it, but we couldn't remove it. Remember,
Right.
it was just too hard
Right.
to get out with a jackhammer. But so we know it goes at least 4 more feet. So that gives us about 16 foot of petrified log, but it was getting bigger as it went down. So it could go down 2 more feet. It could go down 20. I have no idea.
Wow, a mystery to be discovered by someone else in 35 million years. But so this picture itself, this is kind of how you put a portion of it to use. That's a large section. Is that multiple pieces?
It's what I did was, I cataloged as much as I could as I disassembled it, and my son and I, one piece at a time, hauled it up to the right next to our front porch, and then reassembled it using, concrete and some reinforcement, and then the outside, the log was soaked and coated with a weatherproofing preservative to keep it from freeze thawing over the years. We really want to make sure that it stays intact as long as possible. And it's not going to last forever. It, in another million years, it'll probably be gone.
Yeah.
But well.
It's nice.
This piece is probably about 3.5 feet in diameter, and I'm going to guess it weighs probably 1.5 tons.
Wow.
It's maybe 4 feet tall.
Wow.
4.5 maybe. So it's a big piece of petrified wood and a nice decoration outside the front door.
Yeah, it's astonishing as you come up your front steps. It catches you right off. Yeah.
Yes, it does.
I wanted to jump to. Well, we can just talk about some of these pictures. Let's just kind of go through the pictures a little bit and just talk about it. So.
Yeah, this is great. This is my buddy Colin, who was driving the excavator, and like I say, he showed up on a Saturday, and he was glad to be there. And you can see him removing the glacial till, the overburden, off the top of the bedrock, and because he knew we were under a time schedule,
right.
But he was also really excited about the petrified log. So this was the first step, and you can see the pile of
well, I'm sure I'm sure because he probably digs a lot of lots. Yeah. It's his job. So he doesn't run into petrified trees all the time. So for him, this is it's like finding a dinosaur.
Absolutely, and this is the first time. I mean, this is the first that he's seen it, and he was really excited, and that was great. Yeah. I mean, but that's how people have reacted to the find, of course. The builder, all the subcontractors, So he helped us. He pulled this off, and he was only able to go down to the bedrock with the excavator. From then on, we had to go by hand.
That was jackhammer time.
Yeah, that was fun.
So I like this picture because it kind of shows it all intact.
Yes.
And the shovel gives you kind of a perspective.
Yes.
And is that the chunk that was taken out?
Yeah, you
that
can.
Black area in the middle?
The black area in the middle, there were a few pieces have already been removed. Some of it kind of fell out as we were pulling the rock off. On the very top, at the top of the shovel handle, you can actually see the crumbly part of the bedrock. It's sort of a light brown consistency, still part of the same flow, but highly weathered. And you can see that the log projects up into that part of the bedrock.
Right.
To the lower right, at the base of the log, that's where it really gets dense.
So would the top half, so it's lying flat, would the top half of the log be crumbly and then like in a round? So if you cut a round out, would the top third of it be crumbly in the bottom? So it wasn't like the top of the tree versus the bottom. It was actually the top third or something.
That's
like that?
Correct. Yeah, it's the further towards the surface,
okay,
the more crumbly it was. Yeah. Yep.
And then here's an interesting picture. Well, tell us about this picture. What are we seeing here?
So this is the back of our house, showing where the petrified log sat, and the direction of the orientation. This was actually an important clue because when I spoke with the Washington Geological Survey, what they told me was that if I knew the orientation of the log, it was likely to point in the direction of the volcanic flow. And they said that can actually help you confirm where it came from. And you can see in this photo that I've labeled magnetic north and true north because they don't necessarily line up over the years. Right. And then the direction that the log points, which is towards the north and east.
Okay.
And it does point directly at Mount Persis.
Which we know.
Which we know is where the Tukwila Formation came from. So so this is consistent with the bedrock analysis.
It was just another clue that was confirming all this information that you had gathered. You know, how long did you do the research for this? How long was the sleuthing? So you found it, you're pulling it out, and then the sleuthing takes place. So how long was that process?
That was actually months. I mean, the resources are all there, but you know, anytime you try to find something, you might run into a dead end. You wait, you think about it, and then all of a sudden you get an idea. So it sounds easy when you hear it laid out. Yeah, I went from this to this to this, but no, it actually took a lot longer than that. But fortunately, I was photographing the house and the excavation all along the way, just because.
Right.
I liked the photos. Yeah. I wanted the record, you know.
Right.
And, you know, a few hundred photos later, I'm glad I did.
Yeah, you know, all that information.
So this was taken with a drone, actually.
Oh, okay, okay. And then here you are.
Yep. Yeah, I put on my work clothes and got out the shovel because, you know, once we had, you know, broken up the bedrock off the top of it, you know, using a jackhammer, and I also used a pick. I have a hand pick. Then I had to carefully remove the fragments with a shovel and try to get as much of the excavated material out of the way as possible. This was really just, I wanted to find out how big the log was before we took out any more of it. And you can see it's broken up and you know, fragmented even here.
So what we're seeing here, was this all removed?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. In fact, it was removed all the way up to the part that's just behind me in this photo, and
kind of the gravelly area.
Yeah. Well, it gets getting deeper and deeper into the bedrock, and harder and harder to break up.
There's the old jackhammer.
Yep.
More work.
Yeah. This is Matt. He was great. He came out and helped with some of the initial excavation. And you can see that we've gotten a number of the pieces taken off the top. And then we moved them out of the way. We actually, you know, what do you do with 3 tons of petrified wood while you're building a house?
Yeah, where did you put it? Because you didn't have a garage to put it in yet.
No, we didn't. You know, so we started setting it aside, and you can see in this photo too some of the. This was a very large piece at the bottom that we'd managed to take out. That's what's sitting out front of the house, by the way.
Oh, okay, that piece down there?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
That's part of it. So we moved the pieces by hand up to the side right behind my son here, and they used the excavator bucket to move it down and put it in a pile next to the driveway. And then I covered it with...
this is the picture I was trying to get to. This is the picture I was trying to get to.
That's a pile of petrified wood that sits in my garage. The boxes contain all of the smaller fragments. I didn't want to, you know, just throw any of it away. The big pieces, I thought, well, this would be fun to do some landscaping and maybe some furniture. But even the small pieces, I thought this would be great just to give away to the school kids and neighbors, anybody who's interested in having a piece of the rock, rather than just you know, use them as backfill. So there's a lot of petrified wood.
Yeah, that's a big it's a big pile of petrified wood.
Yeah, it is.
And then what are we looking at here?
So. I was interested in the structure of the wood. This was even before I sent it up to George Musto, and I just took it into my workshop and cut a few sections, smaller pieces. I cut them in sections using a stone saw.
Okay.
And so this is what it looked like, at least by my eye. And you can see some of the tubular structure to the wood. It's preserved enough that you could see, you know, the sort of xylem and phloem structure of the wood. And the quartz crystals. The lighter areas in here are crystalline material along the matrix of the wood. And it just sparkles like diamonds when you get it out in the sun. It really is something else. And you can see some of that, I'm sure, in the pieces that I brought into your office. You can see the sparkle from the lights. And it's actually pretty cool. Those are the quartz crystals.
Oh, yeah, I can see it. Yeah, I totally can see that.
Those are the quartz crystals.
That's really cool.
So this section is from, you know, one of these pieces of wood like this. So.
And then what's this? What are we talking about here?
And this is one of those serendipitous finds off the web, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, in trying to figure out the age of the volcanic flow, and so I had a couple pieces of information, right? So we had the Tukwila Formation from the Fall City map. We had from the Geological Survey publication, a likely source is Mount Persis. So I started looking on the web for documents around the Mount Persis flow. And interestingly enough, just a couple of years ago, there was a poster that was presented on the Mount Persis flows.
Oh.
And this is one figure from that publication, and that's one of the references that I provided to you.
Oh, yeah.
And this tells the age of the various flows from Mount Persis. So Mount Persis didn't erupt just once, and that was it.
Oh, okay.
It flowed many times over this geologic, this Eocene period. And you can see those flows in this figure, and they're indicated between 36 and 47 million years ago.
So does the Geologic Survey, or where you've got this information, does it track all the volcanoes in Western or in the Washington area? So if you let's just Mount Pilchuck.
Sure, there you go.
Mount Pilchuck, just because I've hiked it. And
it's a good hike. Yeah, it's a great one. Yeah.
So could I find that information, or is it just
a lot of it? You can, and it's there's a reason for doing this, and I learned this from reading through the various publications. If we understand what has happened in the past, it helps us to better predict what's going to happen in the future. So understanding the geological history of our area is actually very important to knowing what's going to happen next. We're all familiar with Mount Rainier and of course Mount St. Helen, but because they're here and they're new and we can see them, but they are relatively new geologically speaking.
Right.
If you go back to the Mount Persis eruptions, this area was very, very different, and there were other volcanoes that were here. Other lava flows that occurred at the time, debris flows, ash flows that occurred at the time. They're very different than today, but the forces that drive them are exactly the same forces, the plate tectonics. So there's been a desire by the Geological Survey and the groups they work with to understand the geological history under this part of the country. If you go back to the 1960s and 1970s, the data is relatively thin and poor. It's because it was hard to explore.
Right.
Everything's covered with forest, As there's more construction and then better methods of drilling and boring into the ground, we learn more and more and more about the history. So not only are the older maps updated, but the actual information that's contained in those maps in terms of the age of the rock, when the volcanoes erupted, where they were located, that information is also being updated, improved on. In one of the publications I read that we actually know probably around 90% of what's happened geologically in the state of Washington. That's quite a bit, but that means we still have a ways to go.
Yeah, there's still some. So what's the difference? So was the western part of the state more affected by volcanoes than the eastern part? Was it... or is it basically the same?
Yeah,
or
it's probably pretty similar.
Okay.
But the events are actually quite different. And so, most of the Cascade, and we think of the Cascades being volcanic,
right? And
they actually aren't. I mean, most of the rock in the Cascades are granites and schists and other types of rock that they were volcanic, of course, a long, long time ago. But it's actually plate tectonics that are putting pressure on the continental plate and causing it to wrinkle and uplift.
Oh, okay.
And along with that pressure goes a lot of heat, and of course the volcanoes are formed as ways to vent the heat and relieve some of this tension along the folding of the plate.
So it's different. So like the volcanoes in Hawaii, where you're actually building the
Very
island,
different. Yeah.
You're building the island through lava flows. These volcanoes are created through tectonic pressure.
Yeah,
Is that what you're saying?
Very different, very different from the Hawaiian Islands. That's correct. Those same forces, of course, drove the volcanic history of the eastern part of Washington. But But there are other things, of course, that drove what we now know to be the geology, current-day geology in eastern Washington, including the Ice Age dam break that probably carved much of what is now eastern and east central Washington.
Yeah, because I was kind of thinking about that because I know that it was kind of graded, basically, kind of.
Yep.
Right? And so... And that's why I was kind of leaning towards that question, because I was like, well, how does that work? Why is it so flat and everything, and we're a little bit more mountainous over here with our topography so different. And
yeah, it's hard to imagine an ice age flood that by some estimates a wall of water 600 feet high crashed through that part of the state and over a very short period of time, perhaps even days.
Wow.
Carved canyons and the potholes and everything else that we now associate with Washington geology east of the Cascades.
Right.
But the volcanic history, to my knowledge, is very similar. The forces behind it are very similar. I don't know where the volcanoes were, that resulted in the flows, for example, around, by Vantage, that were responsible for the Ginkgo forest.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And history over there.
Do we know the age of the Ginkgo forest approximately?
It's about the same age.
About the same time?
Yeah, okay. it's about the same age.
Yeah.
Yep.
What's a million years between?
Well, yeah, plus or minus. Or minus. But the preservation and the types of petrified wood that I've seen over there, of course, we just have the one log from here,
right? And
I have pieces that I've collected from the other side of the state. The preservation is similar to this log, but I also have pieces that are opalized or agatized, so they're more of a semi-precious gem quality wood that the Washington, frankly, is quite well known for.
Oh, okay. So is that more standard on the eastern side?
Yes, it is. Yeah, and there are two places, in case the listeners are interested, right?
There we go.
There are two places that you can go. One is, of course, the Ginkgo State Park, and there's a museum there, and you can look at some of the specimens that have been found in that area. It's just off of Interstate 90 by the Columbia River.
Okay.
And then there's a trail that you can walk through the park, and you can see some of the logs that are still on the ground that have been found there, including the ginkgo tree for which the park has been named. The other place to go, which I think is a lot more fun, is a place called Saddle Mountain. Saddle Mountain is near the town of Mattawa.
Okay.
So it's south of Vantage along the Columbia River. It's BLM land, and it's an area that you are allowed to collect petrified wood.
Oh, wow. BML land? Sorry.
Bureau of Land Management. So they're public lands.
Okay.
You can find them on a Washington map. Especially if you get a BLM, Bureau of Land Management map.
Okay.
The Washington State Gazetteer has it as well, which is how I found it. And then you can find information on the web as to how to get there. But you drive all the way up to the top of Saddle Mountain. There are no trees. It's arid, and you're about 2,000 feet above the Columbia River, so the views are spectacular. Wow. But you can walk around and find petrified wood on the ground, and you're allowed to collect it and keep it. There's even a sign as you enter the land management area that tells you how much you can collect.
Oh, so, nice.
Yeah, it's really a great resource for people who are interested in going out and finding some of their own.
Yeah. Well, what is your plan? So I know you did the presentation up at Blakely Hall. Do you have any further plans for spreading the information and knowledge that you've collected about this amazing find in your backyard?
So absolutely, yeah. So, and I should add to that, also getting rid of some of the petrified wood. I've got the display piece out front, and I've got a couple of more projects that are for which I've earmarked a few select pieces of wood. But the boxes, the smaller pieces, I actually want to get over to the school systems in Issaquah so that school kids can learn about it and have an opportunity to take a piece of petrified wood home just to show what's underneath their feet in their own backyard. Right. And I'm sure there's a lot more of it here that's just it hasn't been found and probably never will be. But I think it's a great way to get kids interested in learning more about what's around them, and perhaps interested in the sciences. We need a new generation of scientists, and I think this is a good way to start it. So
things like this where it's tactile and you can touch it and you can pick it up and there's a story behind it. if it can, if one child, can say, you know what, maybe I want to be a rock hound.
Absolutely.
And goes to Saddle Mountain and finds their own fossil, their own petrified wood, and it takes them in that science direction, then you've done your job, sir.
No, absolutely. And I find it exciting. My family finds it exciting. I've been out with my friends and extended family members rock hounding, rock collecting.
Nice.
There are other fossils in the state of Washington, and there are other stones to find, a lot of agates and jaspers and opals. And I think that the more people who are interested, it does sort of groom the next generation to carry on that interest. And there's a huge benefit for us in having them. Even if they don't do it for a living, if they're just interested and they gain an appreciation for something that's bigger than an iPhone or an iPad.
Yes, that's right.
And just spend some time outdoors exploring. I think it'd be great.
Yeah. I think that is a great message to end our conversation on today. Well, Roger, I want to thank you very much for joining us and sharing your story about this amazing find in your backyard. And there's a lot of information here, and I'll get some of the websites and stuff and I'll put that in the comment section when we post this.
That'd be great.
So people can follow it up. And thank you for joining us again. And everyone, stay unique.
You're very welcome. Glad to share.